Meaning, when we're in a new condition, we have to adapt how we observe the Torah. I'll give you an example. In the prophets, it says, don't buy and sell on Shabbat, right?
Right.
What does it say in the Torah not to buy and sell on Shabbat?
It doesn't.
Okay, so this is something that gets adapted later because of the current condition of the people.
Shalom, my friends. Welcome to another video where we debunk my debate partner, Radar Apologetics, also known as quote-unquote Rabbi Eduardo. He's a Messianic rabbi who I have debated before. So what I wanted to get into was, so this is the debate. If you haven't seen my debate with Radar, I've done several videos on him debunking Dr. Brown. I did this video with my friend, the Exodus Project. Check him out if you haven't seen his stuff. But yeah, he's somebody who I have interacted with over the years. And I noticed he did this panel with God Logic and this Alex individual. And they were discussing with a Rabbinic Jew concerning, I guess they were supposed to be talking about whether or not Jesus was, chas v'sholem God, but the conversation, of course, devolved into, Radar wanting to talk about the oral law. The irony here, though, is that Radar actually proves that the oral law exists in that statement that he just made. Now, what is the reference that he was referring to, right, in the Tanach when it discusses the idea of not buying and selling on the Sabbath? Where does that even come from, right? So under the microscope, we can find the source for that in the book of Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah. And what it explicitly says, this is a part of the Bible. If you're unfamiliar with Nehemiah, he was one of the people from, the kingdom of Judah who came back and rebuilt the temple with Ezra, and it discusses with Yehoshua ben Yehotzadak, the high priest, and there's Zerubbabel and all the people who came to build the temple. But there was a covenant that was made, and when they were building the temple, and it says explicitly here that they held with their brethren, right, and noblemen, and entered the curse and the oath. This is Nehemiah chapter 10, by the way. So this is discussing a covenant that they're entering into, and entered the curse and the oath to follow the law of God, which was given to them through Moses. So the context of this is clearly through Moses, the servant of God, and to keep and perform all the commandments of the Lord and his ordinances and his statutes. So this is the context of this covenant that they're entering, right? And it says that we shall not give our daughters to the peoples of the land, right? And we shall not take their daughters for our sons. So where does that even come from, right? Well, this actually comes from the book of Deuteronomy. There's a Torah source for this. If you're, wondering, where does that come from, right? So in Deuteronomy chapter 7, we have an explicit reference to this command, right? So yeah, it says, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughter to his son, and you shall not take his daughter for your son, right? And so this is where we get this command not to intermarry. So this is explicitly in the Torah, which would make sense because the previous verse says that this is what the covenant is concerning, right? And it says, as for the peoples of the land who bring merchandise and all grains on the Sabbath day to sell, we shall not purchase them on the Sabbath or on holy days, and we shall abandon the land during the 7th year and the loan given by every hand, right? So this is interesting because remember the context of this verse. These verses here, 31 and 32, are under the covenant that God gave to Moses, the Torah, right? That's what it's referring to. These commandments, right? The mitzvot. That refers to the what we would assume to be the written Torah. But where in the Torah does it say explicitly that we aren't allowed to buy and sell merchandise on the Sabbath or on holy days? Read our apologetics, quote unquote, Rabbi Eduardo. Where does it say that? What did he just tell us? He said it's not in the Torah. So, where do we get this idea from, right? He's saying that the Torah changes, but he didn't say that this was something that, is... Basically, he's arguing that this is sort of like a traditional change and just based on the cultural expectations, right? Not that it was based on the Torah of Moses. But if you actually read these verses and exegete what it says, this is based on the Torah of Moses. It's not a tradition of men, right? He would argue that the Torah changes because of the cultural context and not that it's sanctioned by God, that's more of like a traditional, it's not really from God that you're supposed to do these types of things. It's just like, well, that's just a natural consequence. According to the book of Nehemiah, no, this is under the umbrella of Torah law. So, yeah, Radar, you really shot yourself in the foot here. If you want to, make a response to this, and please, guys, if you want to make some noise, show this to Radar Apologetics. I don't have the biggest following in the world, but Radar's kind of blowing up now. And I think it's important that we put him in check before because the conversation that he was having, if you watch this video, was with a Rabbinic Jew who was a little bit, he wasn't extremely educated on Rabbinic Judaism. He was enough to, at least have a intellectual dialogue with him. But for whatever reason, Radar at this point has enough knowledge to sort of make it appear as though he knows what he's talking about, when in reality, Radar is contextually abusing what Rabbinic Judaism stands for. And this is a perfect example. And let's keep reading in the verses. It says, we discussed the Shemitah. This is discussing the Shemitah year, right? We all know this is in the Torah, right? It was discussing, in the seventh year, you let the year, the land rest. You don't work the land. That's fine, right? That's in the Torah. So you see this command that is not in the Torah sandwiched between two commands that are in the Torah, right? And then and we also set up the commandments to give a third of a shekel a year to the service of the temple of our God. In the actual Torah, right, in the book of Exodus, I believe, it describes the half shekel that was given, right? It doesn't describe it as the 1/3 shekel. So what's interesting is that you even have a certain degree of change there, but it's still under the umbrella of being a Torah commandment. So when we go to, I think it's Exodus chapter 30, you can see that there was the half shekel, right? And they shall give everyone who goes through the counting a half shekel according to the holy shekel, right? This was what was given. And of course, this is the famous part where it's used for the atonement, right? The silver of the atonements, atoning for your soul, proving that it's not just through blood that you are able to receive forgiveness of sin. So any Christian that tries to argue that, you can show that. But that's not the topic of the video, right? It's to show that there is proof of an oral Torah, and Radar Apologetics is demonstrating this proof. Because, why is they saying that this was a commandment that they took upon, right? Remember, this is the commandments from Moses, kol mitzvot, and they're saying inclusive in that they took upon themselves the mitzvot of a 1/3 shekel. So clearly there is a certain level of authority that has been bestowed upon this is Rabbinic Judaism at work in the Tanach. This isn't something that just magically popped up after the destruction of the Second Temple as a response against the idea of, the Christian movement. This has always existed since the times, since the times of Moses, there was some oral component to the Torah, right? But you see it clearly enacted in the book of Nehemiah and in the book of Ezra, because they were the initial members of the Anshe Knesset Hagadol, who basically were the initial rabbinic court that we hold as authoritative to this very day. And this is where we get these types of traditions, such as praying 3 times a day, such as doing, not buying and selling. This is stuff that Rabbinic Jews keep to this very day. We don't buy and sell on the Sabbath. And clearly it is within the context of the Oral Torah that is explicitly described here as being from Moses. So then it says, for the bread of the arrangement of the daily meal offering and the burnt offering, the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the appointed seasons, and for the holy offerings and for sin offerings to atone for Israel and all the work of the temple of our God, right? And then it says, and we cast lots for the wood offerings, the priests, the Levites, and the people to bring to the temple of our God, the house of our forefathers, at set times, year by year, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as is written in the Torah. Meaning that, once again, this covenant, it's called the Brit Amanah, that they went into, is basically a re-establishment of what they couldn't do during the times of exile, right? A lot of these things, such as, the Shemitah year and all this, sandwich in there are commands that are not explicitly in the Torah, such as not buying and selling on the Sabbath, and the fact that they're giving a 1/3 shekel, a 1/3 shekel instead of a 1/2 shekel. Where do they get the authority to do this? Well, you're probably more familiar with the Deuteronomy 17 passage in Parshat Shoftim that gives the authority of the leaders of the generations to basically come up with the authority. It says, if a matter eludes you in judgment, between blood and blood, between judgment and judgment, between legion and legion, words of dispute in your cities, then you shall rise and go up to the place of your Lord, the place your Lord God chooses, and you shall come to the Levitic Kohanim and to judge the judge who will be in those days, and you will inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment, and you will do according to what they tell you from the place that the Lord will choose, and you shall observe and do according to all they instruct you, according to the law they instruct you, and according to the judgment they say to you, you shall do, and you shall not divert from the word that they tell you right or left, right? And then it gives, the consequences for not following that. So Nehemiah was in that position where he was the judge, one of the judges of that generation, and these were, even though this wasn't something that is explicitly in the Torah, according to the book of Nehemiah, it is considered as though, even though these aren't explicit in the Torah, that he is saying what is authoritative according to what God gave to the people of that generation, right? Because he was the judge in that generation. So that is how the source of the Oral Torah is enacted in what Nehemiah is doing. There's no way around it, right? Christians can make up explanations and they can say, oh, well, this was a tradition of men. You can't do that, because it says that this covenant that they went into was sanctioned by the Torah. And we just gave the sources to demonstrate that. And if you want further evidence, if you go to Nehemiah chapter 13, right, you see that it's describing on that day the book of Moses was read in the ears of the people, and was found written therein that an Amorite and a Moabite may not enter the congregation of God forever. So first, it's speaking about the written Torah and an explicit command that is written in the Torah, right? And that relates back to partly it was Deuteronomy chapter 7, I believe, where it talks about not intermarrying. And there might be other, I think there's more than one place where it talks about the Ammonite. Here it doesn't explicitly say it here, but you could take Nehemiah's word, right? That it's I guess we can look for the Rashi to show where it's described. Well, either way, we know that it says in the Torah, right, that there is a precedent for not marrying Ammonite and Moabite women, right? So it says, it gives the reason why, and then it describes the fact that there were people who violated this commandment. And what ends up happening is Nehemiah sees, before it describes that, it talks about, in those days I saw in Judea people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing stacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, and figs, and all types of loads of bringing them to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day, and they sold provisions, right? So he was giving them a warning not to do that because of the command that was given earlier not to buy and sell, which isn't found in the Torah itself. And it says, and the Tyrians who sojourned there were bringing fish and all types of merchandise and selling on the Sabbath to people of Judea and Jerusalem. I quarreled with the dignitaries of Judah, and I said to them, what is this bad thing you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Right? Did not your ancestors do this, and our God brought upon all this calamity and upon this city, and you are increasing the wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath? So he's proving that this law, it wasn't even something that was made up by him. This is something that was kept since ancient times, even before the second temple was built. Your ancestors did this. They violated the Sabbath by doing these things that aren't explicitly described as being against the Torah. The best we can get is Leviticus chapter 23, verse 3, that says, for 6 days work may be performed, but on the seventh day it is a complete rest day, a holy occasion. You shall not perform any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. Where does it say in that verse that you're not allowed to buy and sell on the Sabbath? It doesn't, just like Radar Apologetics told us earlier. So you need an oral tradition to understand that. There's no way around it. And Nehemiah makes it very clear that this is a violation of the Torah, not just a violation of, some tradition of men. No, this is an actual violation of the Torah. And then you see that it's, he further discusses the doors being, he says that he commanded that the doors were closed, and I said that they should not open until after the Sabbath, and I stationed. So here he's exercising this authority that is described in Leviticus chapter 17, in Leviticus chapter 17, where it says that the judge in those times will make, basically, you're not to deviate from the right or the left of what they claim. So he's exercising this, and people are violating this, and the traffickers and all the vendors and type of merchants and merchandise lodged outside Jerusalem once and twice. And I warned them and said, what are you doing opposite the wall? If you repeat it. So he's saying, I shall lay a hand on you. And that's what it says in Devarim. If you don't do according to what they say, then there's going to be severe consequences to this. I commanded the Levites and the watchers of the walls should purify themselves to hallow the Sabbath day, right? And then he lumps in this commandment, right, not to marry the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Ashdodites, right, which we already read about in Nehemiah chapter 10, which is a Torah commandment, which it says at the beginning of the chapter. So clearly, and if you keep reading, Nehemiah also takes this commandment very seriously. He puts his hands on these people for violating it, right? And then he paraphrases from Deuteronomy chapter 7 when he says, I quarreled with them, I cursed them, and I struck some of them, plucked out their hair, and I adjured them by God. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters, either of your sons, for yourselves. And then he says, Solomon sinned with these women, so why do you think you can get away with this? Right? So We already read that in the Torah. We read that in Deuteronomy chapter 7. That's an explicit command in the Torah, where it says, you shall not intermarry with them, you shall not give your daughter to their son, right? So he's paraphrasing from this. That's in the Torah. So you see this emphasis on violating the Torah and how there are consequences for doing that. And even when commands aren't directly in the Torah, they are treated in the same way as if they were not explicitly written in the Torah, such as with the example of Nehemiah and the people who were working on the Sabbath. That was a big deal. Why is it such a big deal if it isn't explicitly written in the Torah? Treading on wine presses? What? Where does this come from? Buying and selling on the Sabbath? What? Where does that even come from? Well, if you actually understand that there is an oral tradition that links back to Moses, that's not a problem. We're not adding or taking away from the Torah because it's already within the jurisdiction of Nehemiah to make these, claims about the 1/3 shekel. Maybe the 1/3 shekel was, equivalent to a 1/2 shekel. Or maybe this was, necessary for different reasons, right? But regardless, the point being that in the context of Nehemiah chapter 10, if you are looking at what the law of Moses concerns, it concerns more than just what is written in the Torah. Buying and selling, as Radar Apologetics already admitted, is something that changed during the time of Nehemiah as, something that became a law, right? He would interpret it as a tradition of men based on cultural situations, but that's not what it says in Nehemiah. It says that under this umbrella, not only are we not supposed to intermarry with other foreign nations, not only are we supposed to keep the Shemitah year and let the land rest, both of those are in the Torah, but we're also not allowed to buy and sell. And there is no explicit commandment in the Tanach, or in the Torah rather, that says we're supposed to do that. So either Radar Apologetics has to throw out the book of Nehemiah and say that it's some sort of book that isn't in line with the Torah because it's adding to the Torah, or we can recognize that there is a precedence for an oral Torah that is in line with the law of Moses, and that is exactly what this Brit Amanah, this covenant that they entered into, is in line with the Torah, and Nehemiah does have the power as a judge to make these types of decrees, even if they're not explicitly in the Torah. And once again, we saw in Nehemiah chapter 13 that this was something that was, it says, your ancestors sinned in this same way, right? So that means that this wasn't something that was made up even by Nehemiah. It's something that has existed, even though it's not explicitly in the Torah, right? Did not your ancestors do this, right? Profaning the Sabbath day and bringing upon calamity upon the city? And you're increasing the wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath in the sense of buying and selling. No way around it, Radar. You just proved that the oral Torah is in the Tanach and that it was enacted and clearly done in accordance with what Ezra and Nehemiah were reinvigorating the people with in the Brit Amanah, in the covenant. So, I hope this video has been a blessing to you all. Please like, share, and subscribe, and maybe we can re-enter a dialogue with Radar. Radar is somebody who like I said, I had a debate with him. I think I put him in his place. Please watch my debate with him. It's called Finally, My Debate with Radar Apologetics. Is Jesus necessary for the forgiveness of sins today? Please give that a watch. Like, share, and subscribe. We need to spread the word of Torah so that this misinformation that Radar is spreading doesn't affect a lot of ignorant, especially, there's a lot of people if you I'm going to do some more videos on this, especially if, this video does well. So please share it. But there's a lot of information here that we need to correct because Radar is really, unfortunately, he's really distorting a lot of information, and we need to keep him in check. So please support the channel, and Shalom Aleichem. Be well, everyone.